Iran versus Israel, clashing prophecies of the end time in the Middle East, astrological predictions, and humanity's spiritual future. All of these we're going to decode and illuminate in this video. Let's go. All right, folks, Iran versus Israel is a major conflict of our times, perhaps the central conflict of our times. And in this video, I'm going to really go really deep on some perspectives and dimensions of this conflict, which are extremely important to understand what's happening, but which perhaps haven't gotten the illumination and the insights that they deserve, the presentation that they deserve. So first, we're going to look at the spiritual dimensions. We're going to dive really deep into the spiritual dimensions of this conflict. The spiritual dimensions, they're even more defining and determining than the geopolitical context. Geopolitical context is important to understand, but the spiritual dimension, what's at stake karmically, what's at stake from the perspective of the evolution of human spirit, that's the most important aspect and factor. And that's what we're going to really look at very deeply. And then second, I'm going to give you also astrological insights on the coming cycles. So, we're going to have some prognoses and predictions and some insights on what awaits the players, Iran and Israel and everybody else, in the coming time. So we can navigate better and we can understand what's coming, what the potentials of destiny are, the cycles of destiny as we can see them in the astrology. If you just want the astrological predictions, you can skip forward, use the timestamps, but you're going to lose out, you're going to miss out on the most important aspect of this video, which is the spiritual dimension, right? So let's get into it. But before I tell you about before we start to illuminate the spiritual tension, the eschatologies, the prophecies, the end time visions that are clashing there, just let me outline the geopolitical context as well. That's important, obviously, but as I said, the spiritual dimension, the metaphysical dimension is even more important, as you will understand as we get deeper. So the geopolitical context is, of course, that of a shift of the world order that we're seeing right now from a unipolar to a multipolar world order, right? So we've had the hegemony of the Western system, the US-led Western system for many decades, right? For sort of like since the Second World War, which also, is established in US dollar hegemony, the World Trade Organization, the IMF, and all of those financial institutions which are protecting that. And now we have that hegemony breaking in front of our eyes, and we have the emergence of an alternative model, which you have come to associate now. We have come to associate with BRICS and with the BRICS nations, right? Which started around the core of Brazil, Russia, India, China, and so on. But now, as the BRICS is increasingly extending and new member states are being added, it's basically getting more and more to be most of the rest of the West, right? So the West and the rest. Everybody who's not in the West is starting to flock towards BRICS. So we had like a massive expansion where all the Southeast Asian states are joining and lots of other states in Africa and South America and so on, right? So these other states, the BRICS and the rest, the multipolar proponents, they tend to come down on the side of Iran in this conflict. For instance, you just need to look at how states vote in the United Nations when there's resolutions, right? When there's resolutions in the United Nations, the Western states, the US and the Europeans, they are typically the only states that vote for Israel, and the rest of the world, apart from one or two states here and there that are supporting the West, the rest of the world tends to come down against Israel. So, condemning the occupation. The rest of the world also tends to come down against Israel in the International Court of Justice, where there's the South Africa case for genocide, which most of the world supports, but who does not support it? The West, right? The Western states. The Western states, Germany, US, right? They're kind of trying to block it even, or stop it from going forward, right? And this kind of dichotomy you see everywhere repeating. Why is that the case? Because Israel has positioned itself, and this is important geopolitically, is positioning itself as the defender of the unipolar Western world order, right? So the continuation of Western hegemony in the world is what's at stake in Israel's success, right? This is actually how increasingly people like Ben Shapiro and others, like the kind of the defenders of Israel in the West, who have a lot of clout, a lot of media presence, how they're presenting the argument. They're saying like, look, if you want the West to continue to rule, to have hegemonic status, you need to support Israel all out, no questions asked, right? And the rest of the world is seeing it differently. They tend to come down on the side of Iran, or on the side of, at least on the side of the Palestinians, when it comes to their claims for a statehood, and when it comes to their claims against Israel with regards to human rights abuses and genocide claims and all of the kind of criminal and horrific stuff that we've seen over the last, in the recent time, but much longer before as well. It's not a recent thing. This is a long story. There's many decades of history behind this. So this is just to understand the geopolitical context is important, because it's not just, these two states. It's kind of a world order that's shifting, which allows you to understand how this individual context fits in there, right? This individual context between these two players. But the spiritual dimension, as I've been saying, is even more important. And only the spiritual dimension allows us to truly understand why even this geopolitical conflict has come down to this standoff, right? This is why we need to get into the spiritual dimension. So when we talk about these two states, right, Israel and the Islamic Republic of Iran, what's important to understand is these are both states that are driven by, informed by some type of political apocalyptic messianism, right? Apocalypticism, if you will, right? Political eschatology, messianic politics, right? What does that mean? It means that they are both built on the overarching ideology and the informing ideology that the apocalypse is soon to come, and their actions are the ones that can bring about the apocalypse, right? Or they're ones that can kind of prepare the ground for the coming apocalypse. These are apocalyptic visions that are informing what they're doing, and we need to understand those, right? And it's also interesting and important that it's these two states that are pitted against each other at this pivotal time in history, right? The karma of these two nations, of these two people, is very closely intertwined. The karma is very important when you want to understand history. Just like humans, individual souls, they can be karmically intertwined, and they can, over many lifetimes repeat in patterns, reincarnation patterns, where they come back to come at the same problems from different perspectives, right? These people, they're very, very closely intertwined. Their karma, it begins with basically Cyrus the Great, the Persian emperor, the first Persian king of kings, who freed the Jews from the Babylonian slavery. He's kind of the greatest benefactor in the Jewish history, right? He rebuilt the second temple. The second temple in Jerusalem, it was built by decree of Cyrus, who freed the Jews and gave them the temple, basically. And then, and Cyrus is seen as a Messiah in Jewish scriptures. And then you also had, who was perhaps the first in history to want to eradicate all the Jews. That was Persian as well. That was Haman, who was the advisor of Xerxes. So the king Xerxes was with Esther. This is a biblical story, right? Esther was the Jewish princess, and she talked Xerxes out of kind of supporting Haman. And this is, to this day, celebrated by the Jews. One of the most important celebrations. I think the second important celebration that Jews celebrate to this day. It goes back to this story of Haman and Xerxes and Esther, right? So the Persians and the Jews, their story, their karma is very closely intertwined. Was already intertwined since antiquity, since antiquity, right? In the ancient biblical text, Persia is the most mentioned nation or people apart from the Jews or the chosen people in the ancient biblical traditions. And these two connected people, they have developed. Actually, if you go back to it, a lot of the essence of Judaism, apocalyptic Judaism, Messianic Judaism, actually came from Zoroastrian influence. So the Jews, when they were in the Babylonian slavery, they had a lot of exposure to the Zoroastrian. Zoroastrian is the ancient Persian religion, the Zoroastrian philosophies and spiritualities. And a lot of scholars know this now, so that the apocalyptic visions, the visions of the end time, they were first, the Persians or the Zoroastrians were the first who had those. Zarathustra was the first to express those. And through Zoroaster, they came to the Jews. The Jews kind of had they shared the same spirit, the same apocalyptic spirit, even and already back then in antiquity, when everything started, in pre-antiquity, right? When in the start of everything. And now these two states, they're both driven by apocalyptic visions of the end time. They want to bring about the end time, and they see themselves as the kind of privileged actor in the bringing about of the end time, right? So this is important. We need to understand this. Now, what's important here is that the current interpretation that both of these states are following with regards to the end time, with regards to Messianism, right, is a particular interpretation that's based on a political realization, not a spiritual or internal realization, right? Okay, I'll explain. So when you look in the ancient scholars, the Jewish scholars, for instance, you look into the great traditional classic Jewish scholars, the Maimonides, Rambam, or Isaac Luria, the founder of, or kind of the central figure of Kabbalah. The Kabbalah is the Jewish esoteric science, the esoteric science of connecting with God, of working on yourself internally to elevate in the levels of consciousness to connect with God, right? That's one of the most advanced forms that humanity has received, is in the Kabbalah, is in the Jewish tradition of the esoteric science. So these traditional thinkers of Judaism, they see the role of the follower or the believer in improving themselves internally, in creating the conditions internally where you ascend into Godhood, get closer and closer to Godhood, so that then the Messiah can come, right? So the bringing about of the Messiah is a function of personal improvement or of spiritual evolution, of spiritual purification, right? This is the idea that informs classical, traditional Jewish spirituality, right? But then there are other strands, the apocalyptic strands, who see this bringing about of the Messiah rather not as a, you need to improve yourself spiritually, but rather they see it as you need to find the external enemy, oppose the external enemy, bring about the land, the external, it's an external thing, bring about the kingdom, right? The kingdom of that we have been promised, which is going to be a land, it's going to be in the Holy Land, right? So you see this already in the ancient times. There were the zealots who rebelled against the Romans, the Jewish rebellion of 66 AD, who were the zealots who were rebelled against her. They got massacred and so on. These were already a precursor of political messianic eschatology, right? People who they were transposing, instead of spiritual internal development, into outside. We need to go and fight against the evil empire, and we need to bring about our land, our promised land, so that the Messiah can come, and we can ignore sort of the internal development. Some of them still worked on internal development. A lot of them, increasingly, they forgot about that part. And this is the great tragedy. This is the great tragedy that happens spiritually, right? When you look at the emergence of Zionism, which is the ideology of bringing about Israel as a state, Zionism emerged in the 19th century as a messianic movement, which was completely bereft, completely empty of that part of spiritual development. So the founders of Zionism, people like Theodor Herzl, who was somebody who communicated with Karl Marx and Friedrich Engels, and he, Herzl, he had also backing from a lot of big finance people, and he founded this movement. When you look at Ben-Gurion, David Ben-Gurion, when you look at the initial people who are important in the bringing about of Zionism as a political movement, these people were largely and mostly not just completely disconnected from the spiritual traditions, from the people like Isaac Luria that I just mentioned, from the kind of the higher, the visionaries of spiritual development in Judaism, not just disconnected from them, they were atheists. These people were atheists. They were completely secular, at least agnostic, right? And some of them were connected to socialist movements, others were just nationalists, basically, but atheists, right? And just scientific materialists, right? Just about worldly power, worldly establishment of this and that, completely without any type of internal spiritual esoteric development, right? So it's very telling if you look at somebody like Ben-Gurion. He's not quoted as, but it's kind of attributed to him to have said that I don't believe in God, but I believe that God promised the Holy Land to the Jews, right? So I don't believe in God, but I believe that he gave Israel to the Jews, right? And this kind of paradoxical belief, right, it informs a lot of the, if not all of the early founders of Israel, of Zionism, right? So what happens here is that you have this political messianism, right? Where it's about, we need to create this thing, right? We need to bring about this, we need to conquer this land. We need to bring about this land. We need to have this land where we can all come back to. We can fulfill the prophecy and so on to come back to it. But without the underlying spiritual basis, right? Which is spiritual evolution, which is working on the levels of consciousness, messianic fervor, basically, without underlying spiritual evolution, right? And this is the great tragedy that happens in the Middle East right now. The fact that this is the case. Why? Because it's not just Israel. It's equally Iran and the Islamic Republic of Iran, which follows the exact same tragedy, which follows the same emptiness of political messianism without the internal spiritual development, without the understanding of the esoteric need for self-development, for self-perfection, self-purification, right? And political messianism without that centrality of self-purification becomes empty, right? Without Christ consciousness becomes empty, becomes dangerous, becomes radical, becomes crazy, becomes dangerous, and is going to throw all of us into terrible and horrible conditions, into global cataclysm. So why am I saying that Iran is the same? Iran is the same, right? Iran, let me tell you, let me decode this, unpack this for you. So Iran, Islamic Republic of Iran, right? It started with Khamenei coming back, 1979. Actually, he was backed by UK and France, he was in France, he lived in France. He was backed by the Europeans who had some issues with the Shah previously, right, who was ruling in continuous succession of 2,500 years, right, as the monarch of the Persian, Iranian Empire, the Iranian sphere. He was starting to turn against, the Western interests. He was basically already in some ways starting multipolar alignments himself. And the West kind of thought that, the Western powers thought that it would be beneficial for them to bring Khomeini into power. And they thought that they could control Khomeini. He would also be a bulwark, a firewall against the communists and so on. And obviously that didn't work out. That didn't work out at all, right? Khomeini came, and the Islamic Republic under Khomeini and in the following years became established as this radical theocracy, And this radical theocracy, it is informed by Messianic Shiaism. Messianic Shiaism, right? So the Messianic Shiaism of Iran is about the spiritual conviction that the Messiah is going to come back, right? The Messiah, so the Shia, they like the other Muslims, they believe in the coming of the Messiah, but for the Shia, it's extremely important. It's very central. It's like everything is about this. The Mahdi, they say the Mahdi will come back. The Imam Mahdi, the Shia said there's 12 Imams, and the last one, the 12th one, went into hiding, and now he's going to come back. He's going to come back at the end of times, right? He's going to come back, and that's going to be the great battle, the apocalyptic battle will happen against the Dajjal. The Dajjal is the liar, sort of a figure similar to Antichrist that the Muslims, that the Islamic tradition has and knows of, right? And this coming about of the Messiah, of the Mahdi for the Shia, for the political Shia, is everything, right? It's kind of their raison d'être. It's what allows them, that's what they're constantly reminding themselves of, what they're working towards, right? What gives them also all of this fervor. When you see right now, the rest of the Islamic world is not so, they're kind of asleep a little bit or whatever, but they don't have this fervor. It's the Shia who have the fervor. It's the Shia who are basically, we need to create the condition, we need to walk into death, and we need to go and face the enemies and the Satan, the small Satan, the great Satan, and so on. It's the Shia who have this extreme political messianism, extreme apocalyptic vision, basically, right? Of wanting to bring about the great end war, right? And now here's the interesting thing. First of all, as I said, this position is just like the Israeli position, is one that is just messianism without internal spirituality, right? Without internal spirituality. It's just political. It's just like mirroring, right? And secondly, this is very interesting to know and to find out, because you're going to say, how come the Islamic world, or the Persian world especially, had a lot of Sufis? The Sufis, right? The Sufis were great mystics. The great esoteric mystics of the Islamic world were the Sufis, right? The Sufis, similar to the Kabbalah, with the Jews, the Islamic world had the Sufis, right? The Sufis people like Rumi, these people who are Ibn Arabi, people who are basically about internal evolution, internal development of the soul, going through the levels of purification of the soul to make yourself closer and closer to God, right? Isn't that strong in the Persian world? Yes, but they were oppressed. They were completely oppressed by the Islamic Republic. The Islamic Republic oppressed this Sufism. It's not about, the Sufism is completely oppressed in the Islamic Republic of Iran. And this is not an original Islamic phenomenon. This is very important to know. It's an original Iranian, Persian phenomenon. It actually goes back to a Persian tradition, So in the Sasanian Empire, this is around, the 4th, 5th, 6th, 7th century, right? Before the emergence of the Islamic Empire, the Iranian Empire was the Sasanian Empire, right? It was a vast empire. They fought against the Romans always, right? They had it was one of the largest empires in the world. And this was a Zoroastrian empire. So Zarathustra religion, Zoroastrian religion was ruling it, Mithras and Zarathustra. And it had a ruling class of priests. The Sasanian Iranian Empire had a ruling class of priests. And these priests, they were called the Magi. Magi is actually where the term magic comes from. So when we say magic, that's a term that comes from Magi. Magi in Persian were the priests who had the secret sciences and who had all the kind of secret magical abilities, right? So these priests, the priests of the Sasanian Empire, they already staged a coup, and they kind of took over the government, right? In certain periods of the Sasanian Empire, under Shapur, under Kawat, there was especially a priest, a magus priest, under the name of Kartir. And this Kartir, he established basically a theocracy of priests, right? They even look just the same as the current mullahs who are in power now, only the color is different. The mullahs are wearing black, and these guys are wearing like red and blue robes, but otherwise the same, right? Same beard, same style, and so on. And these guys, these priests basically, Zoroastrian priests, they established already back then a theocracy that oppressed all of the esoteric seekers, that oppressed the money supporters, Manichaeists, Manichaeists, the Gnostics basically, the Gnostics, oppressed the Christians, the Christian movements, that oppressed the Mazdakites. There was a different movements. There was lots of different spiritual movements. They oppressed all of them in the name of theocracy and just external control, right? And they were apocalyptic. They believed in the coming of the coming Messiah in the Zoroastrian tradition, right? The Zoroastrian tradition also has a similar figure, So this phenomenon is actually an Iranian phenomenon, is a Persian phenomenon. It's not an Islamic phenomenon. You don't have that in other Islamic countries. In no other, Islamic countries don't have, look at Turkey or Egypt or whatever, even Saudi Arabia, whatever. They don't have a class of priests who want to take over control, right? Who want to control the government. This is a Persian phenomenon. And it doesn't come authentically and organically from Islam. It comes from the Persian tradition. But now, what's important for this? What's important about this specifically is that exactly like I saw in the case of Israel, it's a case of political messianism, kind of this promise of the end time is coming, we need to fight for the end time, therefore all of society needs to be subordinated to this coming of the end time, the battle for the end time, right? And this is used in the Iranian case, in the case of the Islamic Republic as well, is used in order to oppress spiritual development, suppress spiritual, the Sufis, the Baha'is, Christian communities, they're oppressed. They're oppressed because, well, they don't fit the mold. They don't fit the official state religion mold, right? Which is a political religion. It's a political movement. So here we have two states that are using political messianism while having abandoned the aspect of spiritual transformation, right? Which is without which messianism is empty and is dangerous. Is extremely dangerous, right? But this is all the fervor, if you're then going to say, the crazy outgrowth of this. When you look at the Israelis, there's people who are preaching the greater Israel, right? And building the third temple, blowing up Al-Aqsa Mosque and building the great, the third temple. All of these are external activities, right? They want to do these so that the end time can come, right? Their Messiah can come, Moshiach can come. Right? These are all external activities, right? So actually, even today, a lot of the Jews who are still closer to the original scholars of the Jews, to the Maimonides and to the Isaac Lurias and so on, a lot of these guys, they don't accept they don't accept Israel. They don't accept the state. There's some Hasidim, there's some other groups, some specific Orthodox groups within the Orthodox Jews who don't accept Israel, who say that all of this is, we are not allowed to do any of this. We're supposed to just improve ourselves. We're not supposed to, go and fight wars and occupy other people's countries and go and claim this for ourselves and kick them out of their houses. And all of this is evil, what we're doing. We're supposed to improve ourselves. There's a lot of Jews, right? Orthodox, Hasidim Jews, who have this view, right? Obviously, you can imagine inside Israel, they're treated like shit, right? They're beaten up and they're thrown in jail and they're just, they can't present themselves without fear and danger of massive repercussions. Similarly, how in Iran, you cannot be a Sufi. The Sufi, dervishes and the Sufis and so on, the groups that are about inner spiritual development, they're prohibited. They're imprisoned, they're sent to jail and so on, right? Because both of these movements, both of these states are built on that exclusion of the spiritual development. So now we have basically unlocked and understood the important spiritual dimension. I have not even talked about yet about some of the other players in this who also have their own spiritual vision, right? I haven't even talked about the evangelical Christians who are their own kind of mad kind of thing, a mad kind of story, right? A strange kind of Anglosphere, Protestant-based supremacy-based, right, Anglosphere supremacy project, which somehow oddly and strangely got into bed with Zionism, and now has this weird relationship where with the Zionists, right, with Israel, where the Christian evangelical Christians, they basically want to see Israel succeed in everything it does, but only so that, from their perspective, they're not going to make it. Most of the Jews are not going to make it. They're all going to die, or they're going to convert to their particular breed of kind of evangelical Christianity at the end, right? So very, very strange relationship. Even the Jews themselves, if you speak to Israelis, they think that they're weird. There's just weird people that they need to work with somehow, right? So you have those, and then you have other kind of more Orthodox Christian views, right? Of course, Russia is important in global development, and Russia is the representative of the Orthodox Christian view. And the Orthodox Christian view is that Israel is not the state. Israel of the biblical Israel is not the people who are there now. The Zionists, they're not the biblical Israel, right? There are some other people who are calling themselves that, but the biblical Israel is the community in Christ. That's the Orthodox view. That's the Orthodox Christian view, that who's called Israel in the Bible is the community of Christians, not these atheist Zionists who took over the state. They're not the biblical Israel, right? And also, and the Russians, in addition to this, they have also the view of being the Katechon. Russia as the Katechon, the third Rome. So you have Roman Empire, Byzantine Empire, Russian Empire, right? So, or Moscow, centered in Moscow, with having the role, the biblical role, or the holy role of protecting the world from the emergence of Antichrist, right? And more increasingly, Russian patriarchs are now starting to say, Orthodox patriarchs are starting to say, if we want to do this, we need to go and become a protective force in Jerusalem. We need to get involved in that conflict, right? So Christian evangelicals, who are very strong, in Trump's second term, they're going to be super strong, obviously, right? They're going to be pushing Trump to get into the war, right? And the Russians, they have their own spiritual eschatology. There's an Orthodox Christian spiritual eschatology, which is going to make them come and enter this conflict as well. So it gets more and more complex. And, well, you're going to say, on whose side should we be? On whose side should we be? Is it, do we have to choose on whose side should we? I can tell you my position. And I'll do this before I go into the astrology. And I'll decode the astrology for you. And I'll show you what's coming up and how we can deal with this. So I remember before, when I posted things on astrology, on astrological cycles, some people say you need to be neutral and objective. You need to be, why are you not neutral and objective? Why are you taking a position? So being neutral and objective is not real. Okay, I can tell you this, and I can share this with you. Whoever says that they're neutral and objective is actually a charlatan trying to fool you, right? Who are the people who say that they're neutral and objective? Mainstream media, right? Mainstream media are the ones that are saying, we are just neutral, objectively presenting the facts without any spin or any perspective. And they're the ones who are the most crooked. They're the ones who are the most driven by certain ideology, right, that they're pushing. You can't be neutral and objective in the sense of just staying out of things when you deal with human values. When you deal with human values, if you try to just stay neutral, either you're a charlatan or you're a coward. Yeah? Or you're just immature, you don't know yet. Those are the only options. If you're staying, I'm neutral and objective. Doesn't exist. So you have to take a position. My position is going to be shaped to some shape or form by the fact that my roots, personally, are from Iran. So my ancestors are from Iran. I have karmic roots and many, many lifetimes of roots in the Persian sphere. Right? I have a personal interest in the Middle East, and in the Persian sphere particularly, not just in this lifetime, but over many, 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 many lifetimes. But does that mean I'm going to be on the side of Iran? No. My family was expelled from that country right? I have been personally suffering. We have been suffering from the government that, that has oppressed and brought these structures that I talked about, these kind of extreme political structures to bear on the people of Iran. That has also broken 2,500 years of tradition, of continuous tradition, which is powerful and important, which is valuable, right? So I'm not going to be on the side of Israel. Am I going to be on the side of Israel? Absolutely not. Absolutely not. Absolutely not. I believe, and I know, and I will share with you here, you cannot see the horrific activities and atrocities that every day you're seeing on your screens as happening, coming left and right, with all of the mocking that comes from people who are right now doing this in Israel around the victims. And then still say that, no, whatever, this is good. This is not, there is no way, unless somebody is really spiritually closed and underdeveloped somewhere, really malformed and developed spiritually, that anybody could accept or embrace what this state of Israel is doing, right? And not even to speak of the kind of, there are some exiled Iranians who are hoping for Israel to attack Iran and so on. You don't want to even talk about these people, right? So now, whose side are we on then? Whose side should we be on? Again, I can share my perspective with you. The developed, the spiritually mature stance, and it's difficult, it's very difficult, especially when it's so complex, it's very difficult. The spiritually mature stance is to be on the side of future humanity, the future of humanity, which is in this conflict, right? It could be that in this conflict, certain factors are happening where you say, okay, it's necessary for history to play out that this side now does this side does this. But the future of humanity is a side that goes beyond both of these, and only is going to be awakened and is going to come back when both the Jews and the Persians and others discover in themselves, again, the centrality of the spiritual purification, of the spiritual development as the central tenet, and not the apocalypticism, not the political apocalypticism, right? Which is mostly just about power and strategy, and it's just used, right, to externalize your problems, to project your problems instead of developing from within. This needs to happen in both sides. This needs to happen with the Jews, with the Persians, with others, with humanity, right? So mystics say, great mystic says, the line between Christ and Antichrist goes through the heart of every individual. Right? Not through this nation and that nation. Gog and Magog are not this nation and that nation. It goes through the heart of every individual. So this is what we have to keep in mind. Now, all of this being said, you've got now the gist of what in my view is far more important to understand. But you're also prepared now. You're also ready now to understand astrology better than I'm going to share with you. Because I'm going to share with you some insights into the astrological cycles as they're happening, right? As promised. So the astrology of these two nations, right, and of this conflict is embedded in the bigger picture of that we know that we talked about, the global picture. And the global picture, I have said this many times, but we can repeat this and we can just see this again and again, is the coming of a very difficult phase where in the coming years, we're going to have to deal with the first here, what you can see here, the Saturn-Neptune conjunction in Aries, right? Saturn and Neptune are both going into Aries. So what does this mean? This means an era or a time in which we're going to have the emergence of new holy wars, right? New radical holy wars, radical spiritual movements. Aries is about war, is about, fiery initiative, is about fighting for, impulsively fighting and going to war for whatever is in there. And you're going to have Neptune, which is about religious worldviews, right? And you're going to have Saturn, which is borders, right? Borders. So going to war, fiery war around religious ideologies and borders, right? This is what we have coming up in the coming years, right? 26 is the center of it, but it's not just 26. It starts a little bit in 25 already, but the full brunt of it comes in 26, and then it continues, right, in the next years as they're still there. They're going to stay there, both of them. They're going to stay there, and they're just leaving in 28, coming out. 26, 27 are kind of very harsh years, not just because of this constellation, but this is one of the key ones, right? So we know that, and we're preparing for that. We're preparing, and we can see where the world is heading to right now, right? We can see where the world is heading to, and we know that this is coming. Now, more immediately, I've mentioned this many times before. I said this, when this whole thing started with my previous video, that they're going to be hitting each other back and forth and back and forth. You can go back and see my video, right? My previous video, my first video I did now, whenever it was, in earlier this year. I'm going to say they're going to be hitting each other back and forth, right? They're going to try and go after each assets, after each other's kind of key strategic assets, and it's going to go back and forth for a long time like this, which it has, right, since then. And now we're going to see a phase of more intense escalation, right? Much more intense escalation. And this phase of more intense escalation is going to start in the coming time in November, right? In coming November. So you see here where we have this Mars and Pluto opposition. Here's Pluto, here's Mars, right? This opposition is going to be in the sky for a long time, right? It starts in November and it goes all the way to April, right? It goes all the way to this. You guys see here, December. It stays, comes back, goes out of aspect, and comes back, right? And so you're going to have November and December, and then you're going to have March and April. These are the hot spots, the hot eras, the hot phases, right? Here, Mars, Pluto in opposition, right? And they are where? They are on Iran's Jupiter. You see, on Iran's Jupiter. So Iran is going to be extremely emboldened in this time. And at the same time, you're going to have the same hits or the same transits, right? The same transit as it happens is going to be here on Israel's moon, see, and on Israel's IC-MC axis. You see here? See, Mars is up there, Pluto is down there. It's going to stay there for those 4 months, right? So moon, what is that? Is the people, right? The nation as the demographics, the people of the place, right? IC-MC axis is how you're publicly seen and perceived. In your role, global role, right? Is you're going to be seen publicly as being in this brutal confrontation, brutal war. Mars opposite Pluto is ruthless, brutal clashes, right? It's just like no mercy type of energy, right? It's not a nice energy at all. Like Mars opposite Pluto is a very difficult energy, right? And that energy is unfortunately, right, going to they're going to be unloading this on each other. So we can only hope and pray that this is not going to lead to lots and lots of innocent people, right, being hit. But unfortunately, we will have to pray simply only for this. There's not much more that we can do around this, right? So you can see here, and it's going to be here on the axis, on the Mars-Pluto axis, right, for a long time. This is going to escalate, really escalate things. And we're going to have a larger phase of escalation, right? Larger than we had before. And then going into 25, 26, starting from 25, right? Starting from 25, mid-25, you have here Pluto sitting on the IC of Israel and in direct opposition to the moon of Israel, right? And this is a very difficult constellation. Very difficult. Pluto is about death and renewal, right? Creative destruction, death. And it's hitting the foundations of the nation. The foundations of the nation and the people of the nation, right? So, and this goes out of aspect. You see, it goes out of aspect in October, right? Or sort of in summer 25, it goes out of aspect. So we could kind of expect that the second part of 25 is going to be more quiet again with regards to this. Like one big escalation from November to April 25, from November 24 to April 25, and then we're going to go out of this and be more quiet for some time. And then in 26, it comes back full force, right? 26, it comes back full force. And 26, this obviously aligns with what we just talked about with regards to holy wars and border wars and all of those things, right? And in that same time frame, we have also very, very difficult transits coming in the charts of a lot of the players, a lot of Russia and the US and Trump and a lot of people. So that's not a time in which we can have much confidence for cooler heads to prevail and for peace development. It's not a time in which that looks very likely, right? Now, on the personal level, there's a couple of more things as well on the personal level. So on the personal level, the leaders, obviously, who are going to get a lot of flack, they're going to be very visible, very, very much in the limelight, is Netanyahu and Khamenei. And these guys, they're both, let's put it this way, they don't have a very positive and rosy future necessarily, only looking at their, not just what all the stuff they've done, obviously, but are now looking at their activations, right? Looking at their actual activations. So Netanyahu, he is here, he's hit by the eclipse. This was the eclipse that was in April, right? In April. His sun, his moon here, his personal moon, right, is directly hit by the eclipse. I already called it out back then. The eclipse in April. So this gives a 1 year window from April 24 to 25, right? To April 25, actually, pretty much matching our hot phase that we had found, that we had talked about, where he's personally, his livelihood, his body even, right? Moon is your body. His standing with the people and his livelihood, his personal being are at danger of being eclipsed. Obviously, this doesn't mean everybody who gets an eclipse hitting the personal planets that they're going to expire, but it's a distinct possibility with what's happening, right? It's a distinct possibility for him personally to not make it, right? Either in this time frame or in that following time frame where he has some very difficult progressions coming up as well, right? So that's one. Now, what about Khamenei? Khamenei, he's dealing with, this once in a lifetime kind of, struggle. He's really struggling right now, right? He's really, really struggling. He has this Pluto in opposition to his natal Pluto moon. And then this Pluto-Mars thing that I talked about is going to sit on there for 4 months. His Mars is on here too, right? He has a Mars-Pluto opposition. It's ridiculous. It's like, look, Mars opposite Pluto, on natal, Mars opposite Pluto. These 4 months that I mentioned from November to April, 4, 5, 6 months, whatever the case may be, 4, 5, 6 months. This is going to be him fighting for his life. He was just diagnosed with cancer as well, right? So Pluto opposite Moon, and it's also squaring his Saturn, so very, very difficult. But in these months, he's going to be fighting for his life, and he's going to go all out, his last stand. This is his last stand, and he's going to go all out. Like, he's going to attack, he's going to go, ruthless. He's going to be ruthless, right? Before he kind of passes on and, leaves this plane and makes some space on this plane for others. He's going to be ruthless, right? And doesn't look good for him neither for the coming time. So both of these guys, they very likely they're going to have to pay the price. They're going to have to pay the price for what they're doing, for where they're pulling the world into, what they're pulling the world into. And then you're going to say, okay, what does it mean for Iran? It's a whole other question. Will there be another leader? Is there even going to be a return of Reza Pahlavi? Pahlavi, a lot of people are talking, the son of the Shah. He, not necessarily, I don't know if he has the charisma, the stature, right? The leadership that his father had, that his father's father had. But, and also, I mean, he's put himself into a situation where he's more seen as a foreign tool than anything else, right? But that being said, he has some very, very positive transits coming up. Very, very positive, extremely positive, most positive in a lifetime, right? In absolutely, over the coming years, actually. Over the coming years, he's going to have this progressed, you see here, the progressed conjunction of Sun, Jupiter, and Mercury on his ascendant. Everything on his ascendant, right? And all of them are conjunct his natal midheaven, his natal MC, right? So, like, this is going on for a couple of years. It starts now, right? It goes on for a couple of years. It starts somehow in late 24, early 25, and then goes on for really until several years, right? Until where they're all conjunct here. Look at this. Jupiter, Saturn, Jupiter, Sun, Mercury are all conjunct the progress MC, and that's conjunct. So if you don't understand this astrology language, it just basically means over the next couple of years, he's got the once in a lifetime time, right, to be completely in the limelight, to be seen better than he has been seen before, to have more effect, right, to get more, success, more cosmic generosity, right, more fate and destiny is going to be more generous. He had a hard life with his siblings, both of his siblings committing suicide, and weren't as strong. The question was whether he's personally that strong or not. But that's just on a side note. I don't see necessarily in the chart of the Islamic Republic of Iran, I'm not necessarily seeing early on any signs of disruption. So even though, yes, Pahlavi's kind of star is going to be rising, but it's not in the chart of the Islamic Republic of Iran. I'm not seeing for the next years, there isn't anything serious coming up that could unsettle that government, that could unsettle that regime. However, and this is where it's really interesting, and we're tying together everything. However, both Iran and Israel, for the year 2030, right? For the year 2030, they have some extremely difficult constellations coming up. Death and rebirth, or just death, basically, right? Just kind of, phasing out. Because they both have, this is Iran, in the year 2030, there is the Iranian Republic, Islamic Republic, has Pluto on the sun. You see Pluto going through Aquarius on the sun, exactly, right? And you have the same thing in Israel, for Israel, right? So Israel, look here, 2030, you go in the progress chart, you go to 2030, and you've got here the sun, progress sun on Pluto, right? Progress sun on Pluto, and in the other case, sun, Pluto on sun, right? Iran and Israel both. And remember what I said, their karma is intertwined. Their karma is like intertwined, right? Since time immemorial. And 2030, we have a constellation coming up that looks like there is a major death and rebirth and reset, like kind of flush away what's happening there with both of them, right? And I talked to you before throughout this video. This is why the spiritual dimension is so important. I talked to you about the need for both, the involved people, right? But also the rest of the world. We have to develop, and again, we have to discover again the teachings of the wisdom traditions when it comes to internal spiritual purification, because the Messiah will come and the golden age will come when we are internally ready, when we have evolved internally, when a community of believers, a community of humanity conjoined, right? Humanity elevated together, collectively elevated and purified, is ready, when we are ready, right? That's when the golden age, when the Messiah will come, not when this land is conquered or that land is conquered, or you nuke this country or you nuke that country, right? Those are not the conditions that bring back the Messiah, those are the conditions that bring back the liars and the deceivers, right? And traditions, both of these traditions have a lot of, this is what I'm going to end this with. Also, make sure to subscribe to this channel, hit the notification bell, do all those things, like this and share this with everyone. But this is what I'm going to end this with. Both of these traditions, they have actually a lot of resources, deep resources for the spiritual evolution of humanity, right? The Jewish tradition, it has a teaching, not just in the Kabbalah, not just in the Isaac Lurias and so on and so forth, but deeply of Tikkun Olam. Tikkun Olam, the improvement, the repairing of the world. The repairing of the world. And fortunately, there are people now, there are Jews in the world, right, who are looking at what's happening and saying, I want nothing to do with what this state is doing. I want to repair the world. I want to be a force of internal repair and external repair. I want to internally elevate and I want to help others elevate. I don't want to conquer and occupy and destroy and bomb and send people to hell and send people and be stuck in that cycle of killing each other and bombing each other, right? Which the others are doing just the same. You can say, maybe, right? But you have to stop doing this. We have to stop doing this. Instead, we have to start working on the internal purification and development. The Persian tradition has similar resources, very similar resources. This is a teaching in the Zoroastrian tradition, Mithras tradition, of farash o keret, of improvement, of internal cleansing, of internal purification. Obviously in the Sufi traditions, very, very strong and taught by the great Sufis, by Rumi and others. Right? Which is a blessing for the world, which is a teaching for the world, right? So when these nations, these two nations or peoples who are karmically intertwined with each other right now, right? If they continue on their path, then the prophecies will come true. There are Orthodox prophecies of Orthodox priests who have, made very clear, not just one guy, there's multiple Orthodox prophecies that have made very clear that the Third World War will start when Israel attacks Iran's nuclear plants, right? So there is prophecies from monks and from seers, from several seers from the Orthodox world who have made this very, who have seen this, right? This is a possibility, it's a distinct possibility. And it may be that in God's plan, right? This is something that we cannot evade. We don't know this. We cannot see that far, right? And we may have to go through this until we get to the light on the other side of this cataclysm. But it may also be that we can work towards, and rather in any case, we have to work towards what comes afterward. We have to work towards the spiritual amelioration, the spiritual development, the internal development, to be ready and set up for the future of humanity, for a future golden age that comes after all of this. I'll leave you with these words. And be well. All the best. Be blessed.